Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast, and today we have Dr. Danny Brassell with us. We're super excited to have him in. He is a sought-after trainer and coach. He's talked to over 3,500 audiences worldwide, and he has authored 19 books. So, Danny, thank you for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how did you end up where you are today?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Amos. More importantly, thanks for all you do. You're spreading some joy in the world. We need a lot more of you. I appreciate you, and I love your podcast because I always get actionable strategies from your guest and a lot of the things that you add. I guess if I was going to write an autobiography, it would be called Pivots, because I've had a lot of pivots in my life, which a lot of your audiences probably can relate to. 30 years ago, I was a journalist. I got to cover President Bush Sr. in the 1992 presidential election. I loved being a reporter and got to connect with all the editors of all the major dailies. And one editor, she offered me a job working the city beat for $16,500 a year. And then a friend told me that they were hiring teachers in South Central Los Angeles for $25,000 a year. So I became a teacher for the noblest of reasons, for the high pay, and taught in inner city for years, loved it, worked everywhere in education, administrative and everything. In 2005, my wife and I attended a real estate seminar, which turned out to be a scam, and we lost everything. And I could focus on all the negatives and talk about the woe is me story, but I'm a positive person. I took away all kinds of important lessons. First of all, my wife is my soulmate. She stuck by me, even though I put her through the ringer. She's an incredible human being. Second of all, money's no longer my end goal, because I learned you can lose it just like that. Third, I try not to judge other people anymore, Amos, because if I was somebody who saw what I had done, I would say, well, you deserve that. But now I realize if you don't really know everything about a person, you don't know anything about a person. Fourth, I became a Christian, which I'm always embarrassed to admit, but the more I read the Bible, I'm not the first screw up to find Jesus. And fifth, I didn't want to file for bankruptcy, and my accountant said, well, you have to make this much more money this year if you don't want to file bankruptcy. And so I started speaking on the side, and I hit that number right on the number. Well, the next year, Amos, he said a much higher number, and I hit that number right on the number. So in year three, I thought, well, maybe I should set a higher number. And basically, during one of the worst economic downturns in history, I was able to build up a very lucrative speaking business, which was rolling along great until 2020, when a thing called COVID occurred. And people asked me, how's my business doing? I'm like, wow, the way I just lost 200 speaking engagements last night because they shut down the world, it's going great. And so the next pivot I made was to coaching, which I resisted for years, Amos, because I coach the way I teach. I have a very high standard for my clients, and I actually will not let you fail. I'm going to hold you accountable until you succeed. And it turns out, working with primarily entrepreneurs, executives, small business owners, they're perfect because they're highly motivated, and I absolutely love working with them. So that's a very long answer to your short question.
Well, one of the things I read was your tagline describes you as the Jim Carrey with a PhD. Can you share a little bit of how in the world did you earn that as a title?
I think I just can't stand boring presentations, and I think that's probably my company now is called the Well-Crafted Story Presentation Workshops with Coach Jimmy Hayes Nelson and Dave Ward. I call us the professor, the performer, and the producer, because my background is in academia. Jimmy was a Broadway actor, and then Dave, he does all of our social media and our comics, and he's like the brains behind the operation. But I couldn't stand dull presentations. And I think one of the things we do, which is a little bit different than a lot of the people I see out there coaching people, is I don't like sad stories. And there's three reasons why I don't coach that way. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had a lot of bad things happen to them. I don't think we need to hear another sad story. I think we need more hopeful stories in the world. Second of all, what Coach Jimmy and I teach people to do is to create what we call a well-crafted story. The president would have called this a stump speech. superhero movies, they call it an origin story. You can call it peanut butter and jelly. This is a presentation you're going to give again and again to introduce yourself to new audiences. So I always question these people that tell the same sad story again and again. Do you really want to tell that story 1,000 times? I mean, I know a guy who he talks about the murder of his daughter. I have no idea how you get up on stage and tell that story again and again. A much stronger person than I am. And third, and this is where people get angry with me, I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you smiling, laughing, happy. I think there's something admirable about that as an objective. I believe these people that tell the same sad story again and again, but the 20th time they're telling it, now those are crocodile tears, and now you're being manipulative. And I'm not saying it's not an effective sales strategy. It's actually a very effective sales strategy. But I personally don't want to have to take a shower after I speak because I just manipulated my audience. There's more ethical ways to get people to want to take the next step with you. And so I like to keep it funny. And, I started my speaking career doing a lot with educators, and educators are forced to watch a lot of dry academic presentations. And I think the Jim Carrey tagline was just because I have a saying, I take my job seriously, I don't take myself too seriously, because I ain't all that and neither are you. And if you think you're all that, teach kindergarten for 1 week. Those little ones will set you straight. I mean, I had a little girl once, LaShonda, she raised her hand. I'm like, LaShonda, question. She's like, Ms. Brassell, when are you going to trim your nose hair? I'm like, this afternoon. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, LaShonda. I ain't all that. So I like to keep it light.
So I was kind of curious, which I guess that leads into that. When you were teaching, did you take that same approach when teaching to try to keep it interesting and keep it exciting for the students?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've taught from preschoolers all the way up to rocket scientists. Like, I make that claim because I used to teach English as a second language to engineering students at the University of Southern California. But my secret is my passion are with the little ones because they don't know what they can't do yet. And I always say kindergarten is New York, because if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, because those kids have about a 7-minute attention span, and you better keep it light and laughing. And they taught me how to be a much better presenter.
Fascinating. And the real reason I ask that, my wife is a elementary school teacher. And so I get to hear some of these, some of these stories as they come back. And it's always amazing to me. Many times these young students, it's amazing the perceptions that they do have and some of the connections they can make. And then the other things are just funny. They'll say anything. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, the two greatest questions I've ever been asked by human beings were asked by little kids. I had a 5-year-old, Maria, raises her hand, and she's like, Mr. Brassell, where does it say Humpty Dumpty was an egg? And I laugh, and I start rereading the nursery rhyme. I'm like, wait a sec, it doesn't. Nowhere in that nursery rhyme does it say Humpty Dumpty's an egg, but there's always a picture of an egg. How did I miss that all those times? Tyrell, 6 years old, raises his hand one day. He's like, Mr. Brassell, is Curious George a monkey or an ape? And I laughed until I reread the book. The man in the yellow hat, always called Curious George. My little monkey. Well, where's his tail? He ain't got a tail because he ain't a monkey. He's a chimpanzee. I've read that book 3,000 times, missed that every time. Tyrell got it the very first time. That's why I always tell people, if I'm ever murdered, I want a first grader on the scene, not my wife. First, like, about 6 feet tall, dark jacket, dark pants. My wife would be like, I don't know. I think he's this tall. I think he's white. Kids are so perceptive of things that the rest of us, I don't know when we lose that curiosity, but I learn so much from the little ones, and I miss being around them every day because I love their energy and their perspective.
Interestingly, I truly believe we regain that perspective every time we do something new as adults. And I always encourage people, throughout when they're taking a new job, a new position, if I could only give them one piece of advice, it would be to continue to keep the beginner's mind throughout everything you do, because every time we start something new, we get excited about it and we pay attention to every piece of it. It's when we become complacent, I think, that we kind of lose track of that.
I'm a Baptist in your front row saying amen. You got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. I mean, most of the people I work with, they're not trying to become professional speakers. They're just trying to use speaking to grow their business. And you got to do the reps. I mean, I guarantee you, Amos, on your very first podcast, you sucked.
Absolutely.
And the second time your podcast, it sucked, but it didn't suck as bad as the first time. And now you've got this well-oiled machine because you've done the reps, and that's how you get better at anything. Speaking is a very teachable skill. And it's amazing to me. There's so many. I mean, you and I were talking about John Maxwell, who's one of my idols earlier. But perfection is the enemy of progress. You get better every day, but you got to keep on doing it.
Absolutely. Two things that John always says. One is anything worthwhile is uphill. He'll tell you he doesn't know anybody that slid or coasted their way to success. It just doesn't happen. And excuse me, as you're kind of thinking about all of the things that we've talked about so far, he will tell you that a story will get you much further than what statistics will. We have a habit of wanting to input all those statistics, but just connecting with people and telling a story is much, much better and is going to get you much further than what the statistics are. And that's one of your specialties. And I believe you talk about using an approach of focusing on kind of a Paul Harvey style storytelling. Now, with that being said, for our listeners that maybe don't know what we're talking about, can you just explain a little bit, what is a Paul Harvey style story?
Well, I grew up listening to Paul Harvey on the radio. Sadly, he passed away a couple of years ago at the age of 325 years old. Every day, Paul Harvey would come on the radio at 12:15, and he'd say, "I'm Paul Harvey," with the rest of the story. And for 5 minutes, he's telling you a story, and you're trying to guess who's he talking about or what's the company. And so when I was a middle school teacher, I was the only teacher at my school that none of my students were ever tardy, because I always started class with a Paul Harvey story, and they always loved that. But the problem with Paul Harvey stories is a lot of them are about like Sears and Roebuck. Well, people today have no idea what Sears and Roebuck is. And so when I wrote the book, Leadership Begins with Motivation, this was my personal homage to Paul Harvey with all kinds of, here, I'll give you an example of the story. May I give you an example of a quick little story?
Absolutely. Love it.
Okay. So on the morning of January 17th, 1977, Gary Gilmore, in a plain T-shirt, strapped into a chair with a bag over his head, awaited a firing squad of 5 law enforcement officers to execute him at the state prison in Draper, Utah. Convicted of murdering a gas station employee and motel manager in Utah the year before, Gilmore would be the first person in the United States to be executed in nearly a decade. Shortly before his execution, prison officials asked Gilmore if he had any last words. Neither he nor anyone else that day would know the impact of those last words. Over 10 years later, in 1988, Dan Wieden, an advertising executive who co-founded the Wieden and Kennedy Agency in Portland, Oregon, made something of a morbid pitch to a struggling fashion company. He recalled the inmate's final words and used a slight variation for his pitch, and seemingly everyone hated his idea for the company's new slogan. Trust me on this one, Wieden implored the company's co-founder. And the co-founder, his company, and the public have not looked back since. The co-founder's name was Phil Knight. The struggling brand he co-founded was a shoe company called Nike. An advertising executive, Dan Wieden, slightly altered death row inmate Gary Gilmore's final words, "Let's do it," into the phrase, "Just do it." So that's the type of story I like to share with the kids. Well, after I wrote that book, I realized, I read the book, I'm like, completely unintentionally, most of my examples were of white male Americans. And so the last book that I wrote is called Misfits and Crackpots, which I actually made a podcast of it for people that are too lazy to read the book. They can listen to the book. And Misfits and Crackpots, most of my stories focus in on women, minorities, and international examples. And so I just think that people are yearning for stories. I agree with the point you made. It was, of all people, it was Joseph Stalin who said, "A million dead is a statistic, one dead is a tragedy." Translation, facts tell, but stories sell. And so this is what, when Jimmy and I are working with our clients, is how to create a moving presentation, because we know that human beings are not creatures of logic. They're creatures that make decisions based on emotion. And the only way we judge the impact of an effective presentation is how are we moving the needle for you? So, which is how many people are going to continue to engage with you. So when I'm working with people, it could be an unpaid next step, like subscribe to my podcast or book a phone call with me. It could be a paid offer like buy my product or invest in my coaching program. But we're evaluating your effectiveness by how many people, what percent of your audience is deciding to take that next step with you. I find that most of the people we work with, they're not trying to be professional speakers. They're trying to acquire more clients or get a promotion at work, or, it just depends on who we work with politicians. So politicians, when we work with politicians, they have two different types of presentations. One is to fundraise. Another one is to get people to vote for them. We're working with a pastor. Their two different audiences is the call to action to get people to convert, to accept whatever savior it is, or is it to get more tithes to support your church or your temple or whatever. When we're working with executives, it's like, are we getting venture capital, or are we, how many more product launches are we serving, and things like that. So it just depends on who we're working with, but that's how we evaluate our effectiveness.
So, excuse me, I'm completely bought in that storytelling is a good thing, but how can I use it? I'm a CEO and I have my board of directors. Is there a place? Should I tell stories in my board of directors meeting, or should I go in with my PowerPoint stuffed full of all kinds of numbers and facts that probably nobody pays attention to? Maybe I just answered the question.
Yeah, the only way you ever connect is with those stories. I was actually, my daughter's doing a presentation and she had all these PowerPoint slides. And I can tell you, in all my years of speaking, Amos, I've never had a person come up to me 6 months later and say, you know what I really remember about your presentation, Danny, was that one slide you showed that had 18 bullet points that were written so small I couldn't even read them. I've never had a person say that. Connect with stories, and if you watch the best communicators always connect with stories. I would encourage everybody in your audience. Anything I've ever watched with Steve Jobs, that guy practiced his butt off, and he did an incredible job of connecting with audiences. He has one of my favorite phrases. What if there was a way? He'd always say, what if there was a way to connect to, what if there was a way to have a phone and to have an internet connection and to have all the, and he's getting people, he's like, oh, it's called the iPhone. He's getting people thinking about it. His Stanford commencement address, I think is one of the most perfectly structured presentations I've ever seen. But I love watching, for your audience, if they want to get better at speaking, there's two ways you get better at speaking. I always tell people, first of all, you got to watch lots of speakers. I watch politicians, I watch comedians, I watch televangelists, I watch them in front of big groups, in front of small groups, in front of men, in front of women. I'll give you a ninja strategy. I watch a lot of televised award shows. One, Jimmy and I work with a lot of people when they win their awards, how to connect with an audience. But two, I'm always looking to see the person, when they win the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to connect with their audience. I want to see how they use their time. Now, most people waste their time. They get up there and they're like, I want to thank God, I want to thank the Academy. It's stupid. Nobody's paying attention. But every now and then, a person does an incredible job of connecting. So a few years ago, there was a gentleman by the name of Joe Walker, and he won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. Now, this is Hollywood's biggest night. The important people are in the front, the actors. And you can tell, they're showing the audience, nobody's paying attention. This is film editing. And Joe Walker gets on stage, and he's British, and he speaks very slowly and deliberately. And he says, a lot of people don't know this, but when phrased properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now the camera's scanning the audience. You see people leaning in like, what's he talking about? And he goes on, he says, for example, yesterday I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden, you see everybody laughing hysterically. He gets off stage. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine said it was one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. 30 seconds to connect. That is a good presentation. So one way to get better at speaking is to watch people speak. And I would totally encourage you, not just in your industry. If you're in the financial services industry, don't just watch financial service speakers. Watch people in other industries and figure out how to grab their best ideas and apply it to your industry. The second way you get better at speaking, one of my mentors was a guy named Jim Rohn, and Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups. Translation, you got to do the reps. And so even the smallest towns in America have an Optimist Club, a Lions Club, a Rotary Club, a Kiwanis Club. You got schools, you got churches, synagogues, temples, you got chambers of commerce. I was working with, this guy drove me nuts, Jason. He's 22 years old, about 3 years ago, and he was just such a Debbie Downer. I don't have an audience. I'm only 22. Nobody will listen to me. And I'm like, do you have a Facebook account? Finally drove me crazy. He's like, yeah, I got a Facebook account. I'm like, all right, we're going on Facebook Live right now, you and me. And he went on, and he did his 45-minute talk that we had put together. And one woman from Ontario, Canada, accidentally watched him, and he sucked. The next day, I didn't watch him the next day, but I told him, you got to do it every single day. Tell me how every day you got to call me right after you do it. So he did it the next day. Like 3 people watched him. Well, the reason I'm telling you this story, Amos, is 3 years later, I am blown away by Jason. He has gone on Facebook Live every single day for 3 years. He now has 6,000 people in his community. And last year, he almost sold 7 figures to them in the different products that he launched. And the reason I share that story is because, it's great that he made all that money. That's wonderful. But that's not the reason I tell the story. The reason I tell the story is I'm just so proud of him. He did the work. And that's why I love working with the audience that I work with right now, is most of them do the work. I mean, I have one guy, he pays me an extraordinary sum of money. He doesn't listen to a thing I say. And it's not fulfilling at all. Like fulfillment, there's 2 parts to fulfillment. Yes, fulfillment is, yes, you get paid for the service you offer. But what's fulfilling to me is watching the people I coach succeed far beyond where I've ever been. That's what's fulfilling to me. I don't even know what the original question was. I think I went off on a tangent there. But I got very excited watching people do the work and do the reps. So, I think it was about how do you get better at speaking. And so, yeah, the 2 ways to get better at speaking are you got to watch lots of speakers. You got to do the reps. I think I'm speaking to the choir, because your audience, the fact that they're listening to your podcast, that's the kind of people they are. Most people, they choose to drink and to gripe about the government. I have no use for people like that. They're not part of the solution. The people that are parts of the solution are people trying to better themselves. They listen to podcasts. They do something crazy. They open books and read books. They try to figure out how to make the world a better place in their own way.
So 2 things, and you might have went on a tangent, but you hit some really, really good points. Now, one, I do have to say, unfortunately, for me and trying to get better at speaking, I had went out and bought a sweater and stuff and thought if I look like Steve Jobs, it would automatically work. So I guess I'm wrong on that one. But all kidding aside, I think one of the things a lot of people do when they're thinking about an audience is, one, they're thinking about somebody on stage and, a bunch of people in front of them. And an audience is not necessarily that. And you hit it with the gentleman you talked about. An audience can be 2 people, and that can be a powerful audience. It just depends on who those 2 people are. Excuse me. So I think differentiating, why are you speaking and why are you trying to connect? I guess my other question would be, why should a business leader, a CEO, a manager that has 10 direct reports, why should they care about connecting? What's it going to do for them? Why do they want to connect?
Well, that's a great question, Amos. I mean, and that's how we always begin. Whenever I'm working with a client, Jimmy and I call it our 5 C's process. Everybody has their own little name. But the most important C is the very first one, which is clarity. So there are 2 questions I always ask my clients. Who is your audience, and what is the problem that you solve? And you'd be amazed, Amos, 95% of the people I work with, they cannot answer those 2 basic questions. Now, after we work, they figure it out. But you need to have clarity on what you're doing. And so I would invite that leader of an organization, who is your audience? So let's say your audience is your 10,000 employees, okay? What is the problem that you solve? So I've worked with CEOs, and they're like, we want to make $1 billion next year. Well, that might sound sexy to you as a CEO because you have stock options and all these things. But if you have 40,000 employees and they have no stake in the game, well, it's not interesting to them at all. And so the whole point then is we're trying to figure out how to create a story to get those people to be interested in your goal as well. That would be for that CEO. I mean, so I worked with a CEO, and that's usually its origin stories are where we're going to go with that. I mean, here's an exercise everybody in your audience can do right now is after the podcast, sit down in a comfy chair with a pen and paper, libation of choice, and for an hour, I want you to write down every story that's ever happened in your life. And I don't mean the entire story. I just mean triggers, like the time I locked myself out of the car in front of Costco, the time Dad spilled mustard on his tie at that fancy restaurant. You'll find in an hour you can easily come up with like 500 of these triggers. So that's the first part of the exercise. The second part of the exercise is now I want you to think about, what's this story really about? Oh, this is a story about never giving up. Oh, this is a story about loyalty. Oh, this is a story about working together as part of a team. And so if you went on my computer, I literally have hundreds of files like this with tens of thousands of stories. So whenever I want my audience to do a certain action, I have a story for that action. I mean, this is the biggest mistake I see most people. They just tell stories, but the story doesn't have a point. You know, you have to craft a story that actually. So I'll give you a perfect example. I was working with a gentleman the other day. He owns a whole bunch of fitness centers, and so his call to action is he wants people to invest in a gym membership. And so I said, well, so the action you want your audience to do is they've struggled before because they try to do it on their own. What they need to do is hire an expert. He said, yes, that's exactly what I want them to do. I'm like, okay, so what we have to do is we have to craft a story that has nothing to do with gym memberships, but illustrates to people the same point that you're trying to make. And so I said, okay, I'll give you an example. Many years ago, my wife and I, we had theater tickets. We were dressed to the nines. We were driving to the theater, and we got a flat tire. And my wife said, okay, I'll call AAA. I'm like, you don't have to call AAA. I'm a man. I can fix a flat tire. So I opened up the trunk. I got the spare tire. I got the pumping thing and the thing that's shaped like an X. And I was trying to fix this flat tire for 27 minutes, getting grease all over me, while my wife is just sitting there shaking her head like, I could have done so much better than this guy. Well, unbeknownst to me, Amos, she'd already called AAA. And this 17-year-old punk shows up in a tow truck, and in 3 minutes flat, he fixes the flat tire. You know, I think there are times in life when all of us think we can do things on our own. But if you want to save time, you want to save money, and you want to save a whole lot of headaches and embarrassment, you hire an expert. And so what I'm doing is I'm showing him, here's how you're using a story that's not related to, you're not specifically telling people, get my gym membership, but what you are showing them is an illustration of, oh, here's a time when, I'll give another example. A couple of weeks ago, my wife asked me to fix the toilet, and I called the plumber. And she was so angry with me. She's like, why'd you call the plumber? I told you to fix the toilet. I'm like, I did fix the toilet. I called the plumber. She's like, that costs a lot of money. I'm like, yeah, I get paid a lot of money for coaching people. That's how the economy works. But if I had tried to fix the toilet, it would have taken a lot longer. I wouldn't have done it correctly. And it probably would have, in the end, cost us a lot more than if I had just hired the plumber. There's another perfect example of this is a hire an expert story. And so when I'm working with clients, I'm trying to dig into their own personal experiences of, okay, I guarantee you, and this is the other thing I always see, Amos, is people think that they have to have done something amazing. I mean, yeah, I've worked with some pretty amazing people. I got a guy right now, he drives me crazy, Amos. A guy, he climbed the highest peak of the 7 highest mountains on the highest mountain on every single continent. He swam with sharks in Madagascar. He did the Iditarod up to the North Pole. He's crazy. I'm like, nobody can relate to you. Like, the most relatable experiences, and this is how you're going to connect with your audience, is everybody peed their pants in first grade. This is why your wife, I guarantee you, she has great stories as a teacher. Whenever I use politicians as examples, I'm not using the politics. I'm just showing the speaking technique. President Reagan was pretty amazing in that here he was, a millionaire from Bel Air, who was able to connect with auto workers in Detroit, Michigan. He made them think he could have a beer with them. I mean, that's the power of connection. And so, like, if I'm working with a CEO, I need to humble this person. I need to bring them down to think about that person at the very bottom. what can you do to inspire that person? So that's the power of storytelling with people. And what you have to do is you have to find the proper stories. Again, John Maxwell, who you and I both love, he's an expert at this. He's really good. He's got tons of stories. But the thing that he does, I like better than anything, is Brene Brown talks a lot about this, is he exposes his vulnerabilities constantly. And this is a key point. There's two big mistakes that I see people make when they're making presentations. One of them, we were working with a financial planner about 3 months ago, Richard, and he started his presentation. He's like, oh, I've worked in the financial industry for 30 years. I've made over $1 billion for my clients. I worked with this famous person and this famous person. I said, time out, Richard. What are the 3 most important elements of real estate? Location, location, location. It's all right to brag, but you're doing it the wrong part of your presentation. And so we changed his opening story. Now his opening story, he takes the audience back to the very first client he ever booked 30 years ago. And Amos, it's basically a comedy of errors. I can't believe that people actually invested money with this guy. He did everything wrong. And this was what was key to the Richard story. So Richard, the way he gets clients primarily is he does these complimentary 1-hour talks at steakhouses like twice a week for about 15 married couples to invest their money with him. And he said that it's usually a married couple, a man and a woman, and the man always sits there with his arms crossed during the presentation, looking at him like, what are you trying to sell me? And he said that out of the 15 people, he usually got about 6 of the 15 people to book a call to invest money with him. Well, now, since we changed his talk, now he said he noticed it immediately. That same guy is patting his knee because he's laughing so hard during the story. And now he averages 12 of the 15 couples are now booking him for that phone call. That's the power of changing the story. I think I was going to make another example of that. But this is what we're trying to do, is we're trying to figure out ways. Brene Brown talks about vulnerability. So the first thing I always tell people, if I could give you one strategy, is stop telling people about your successes. Start telling people about your failures, because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they have all failed. And the more you share your own personal failures, you're going to connect with those people. They're going to see themselves in you, which is very important. The second biggest mistake, and this is a big one, everybody in the audience has to listen to this one, is most people give multiple ways to multiple calls of action. And I always tell people this: choices confuse and cause you to lose. Before I was with you, Amos, I was on a podcast, and the woman at the end of the podcast, she said, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you like, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating. And I said, you just told your audience to do 3 things. They're not going to do any of them. And this is very powerful. You've got to think of what's the one thing I want you to do. When you have that focus, you're going to get your audience focused on that. So if you can do those 2 things, you're better off than most of the people I see making presentations today.
So one thing you mentioned about writing down all of your stories, and that's something that I picked up from watching John Maxwell, that he keeps a filing system. So not only am I've actually taken time, went through and written many of those stories, and then taken some time, as you did, and put at the top, like what lesson was there to learn here, and kind of laying that out. So it helps me to jog my memory when I'm coming up with something new. Here's a place I can go. And then the reason I mentioned the second part is I may be looking through the Wall Street Journal and see an article. It could be a company that failed, but I might see something there that, hey, I see here that there's a leadership lesson in why they failed. And so I file that off to the side, and then you can use that story. And when you start to talk about stories, sometimes when people try to use them, and you mentioned this as well, one, just because it happened doesn't mean you have to say it. So nobody cares that I was wearing a tan jacket, at the moment when this happened. So I can let that part out. But also people get, one, can you change your own story is one question that I often get. And what I mean is, well, I don't want to use the actual company because I still work with them. And so my advice, and I'm curious what yours is, sure, you may change the the people in the story, it doesn't change the fact that it happened if you're protecting, those people or that company from, from putting their name out there. But also sometimes people will come and say, well, can I fabricate stories to use? And I would say no, but I'm curious, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, you don't have to lie. I mean, you can change details. I mean, yeah, I agree with you on something you just said, Amos, which I loved, is because I've been talking about personal stories, but you were talking about doing clippings. I'm like, well, that's a good strategy as well. I mean, I was working with a woman several months ago, and she was being very difficult. I have no personal stories. I'm like, everybody has personal stories, but just to appease her, I said, okay. I love personal development books. If you look at one of the most successful personal development books of all time, it's Think and Grow Rich, in which Napoleon Hill, the author, shares no personal stories. What he did is he interviewed all kinds of millionaires and shared their stories. I'm like, well, that's a really good strategy. And so, using a story from the newspaper is a really good technique. Is here's the lessons that we can learn from this story. I like you. I have non-disclosure agreements with almost all of my clients. And so, yes, I've worked with some pretty big companies and some pretty famous people, and they never have to worry about me sitting there and saying, oh, I worked with so-and-so. It was when I was covering President Bush that President Bush said something to me. He and I both, we hate name droppers, which is, everybody loves to just give that. Who cares? Like, just say, oh, I was working with this person, and I can tell you already the examples I've used. Richard is not Richard's real name, and Jason is not Jason's real name. They are the same genders. But no, you don't have to lie. I'm Irish, and they always say, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. I don't know if I would ever specifically lie, but I will change details. Sometimes I play with the timeline a little bit. But those are really more out of devices for making the story move along a little bit quicker and get to the teaching point that I want, which I don't have a problem with anybody doing that. I mean, it doesn't always have to be sequential. There's actually a great, I remember watching a great graduation speech. So again, I'm addicted to watching speakers. So yeah, watch graduation speakers. I watched, it was Neil Gaiman. He's an author, and he gave a great speech to your neck of the woods. It was like the Pennsylvania School of Design or something. And in his speech, he said that when he's giving advice to the graduates, he's like, well, I lived in the pre-internet age, and I just lied about all the publications I already had. And he's like, and I felt so bad about it that later on I made it a point to write articles for all those publications I had originally written for. He's like, so now it's no longer a lie. It was just I was chronologically challenged, and I love that point. That it's all right to change the chronology if you need to.
And one of the other things that it took me a long time to figure this out, but I believe when you're telling your personal story, your origin story, something that has to come out of that, you kind of said earlier, people sometimes tell a story and there's no point. You're kind of wondering like, why did you just tell me that? And I think truly that many times when I thought I was telling my origin story, I didn't really end with what throughout that connect the dots has made me passionate to do what I do today. And those things exist there. I just didn't connect the dots for the audience. And when I started to do that, that made a tremendous difference as well, because people were like, oh, okay, I get it. Now I know why he's passionate about communication and leadership. And so that seemed to help me along the way as well.
Yeah, I really love that point. I love the way you say that, connecting the dots. If you can connect the dots, I mean, I have a very specific structure. Not everybody has to use that structure. I see, but it's kind of like when I studied art in Spain, I never was interested in Picasso because I thought all of his paintings were weird. But then when I started studying Picasso and saw when he was a kid, he could look in a room and then paint that entire room from memory, like a photograph. Then I realized, oh, this later work is at such an advanced level. He understood the basics and he was able to explore beyond there. So I help most of the people understand the basics, but if I'm working with a professional speaker, there's some other strategies that we can tag on, and I'll let them do that. It's kind of like Michael Jordan doesn't always go for the layup. Sometimes he does the triple pump slam dunk, but he's earned that right because he mastered the fundamentals.
And the other thing I'm curious before we kind of move to a close is when you're talking about an origin story, and I'll give a short example only because it relates a little bit to where you were in 1992. At that point, I would have been about 12 or 13 years old, and there was a young man, as a young man, I had an auctioneer that my mother cleaned houses for a living. She worked for him, and he had kind of taken me under his wing. And at that point, when President Bush ran for office, he said something to the nature of, "Read my lips, no new taxes." And well, even as a 12-year-old, as then that didn't quite come true. And I was kind of, upset about this. And I was talking to my mentor, and he said, "Well, you need to write to the president." And I said, "Well, I'm 12 years old. Why would I write to the president, right?" And he said, "Because you're an American." He said, "You might not be old enough to vote, but you're still an American. And rather than complain, why don't you become part of the system and write a letter and let him know?" And I'm like, well, he's never going to write me back. He's not going to listen to a 12 or 13-year-old kid. Anyhow, he pushed me a little bit. He got me the address and everything, and I wrote the letter. And lo and behold, maybe a month and a half, 2 months later, I received a handwritten letter back from President Bush. Now, at that point, I'm amazed. I'm a kid, but I also was, fairly intelligent, and I realized that, this is remarkable that I actually received a handwritten letter. Like, how did this happen? I later found out his son had went to Villanova Law, and he was just in he would have been, I believe, in his senior year, but he had a friend that was working at the White House. And somehow they got message through that there's a letter coming, and we're trying to encourage this young man. And so he flagged that letter, got it to President Bush, had him respond to it. And my point is that made me understand at that point that I could be part of the system. And all the way through my life, if something like that comes up, I'm not afraid to write a letter or to do something because I know that my word might just matter. And so that's a story I would tell if somebody said, "Why are you passionate about politics?" And, I'm not here to talk about politics. I'm just saying that would be an origin story or part of that origin story. So my question is, depending on your audience, is it okay to change your origin story? Obviously, it needs to be factual and real, but is it okay to change it depending on your audience, or do you stick with that same origin story no matter what?
Yeah, first of all, I love the story. I absolutely love that story, Amos. It's fantastic, and it'll serve you very well. But I mean, when I work with people, I'm like, I got 50 different types of talks, and it's all, again, based on those first two questions. Who is your audience, and what is the problem that you solve? The clarity questions are everything. And so if I'm speaking to school administrators, I have one talk. If I'm speaking to teachers, I have another talk. If there's no reason for me to give a teacher origin story if I'm speaking to school administrators. If I'm speaking to the parents of students, I'm going to give them a totally different. I'm going to give them a story about, as a parent, as a young parent, the mistakes I made. If I'm talking to students, I'm going to talk to. I was in India and I gave a talk and got all the kids all pumped up, and the kids are coming up to congratulate me afterwards. And finally, I see this 6-year-old boy. He has tears in his eyes. He's like, "How can I succeed?" And I noticed he's missing his left arm. And so I crouched down to his level and I say, when I was your age, I went to 18 different schools before I was 12 years old. Everybody called me stupid because I stuttered. And eventually I went to a school, and a teacher, she worked one-on-one with me, and she would sing things to me. And I found I could sing back without my stutter, kind of like the movie The King's Speech. And eventually I lost my stutter and I became a swan. But I looked into that little boy's eyes. I'm like, isn't it interesting that the little boy who everybody used to make fun of and say he was stupid because he couldn't talk right now gets paid ridiculous sums of money to travel the world to do what? And he gets the biggest grin on his face. He's like, "Speak." I'm like, "Never let anybody tell you what you can't do. The world is your oyster." That's a difference. So after having that, now I use that speech all the time with little kids, because I'm like, "Hey, don't let anybody tell you what you can't do." But I'm not going to. Why would I tell that story to? It just depends on who my audience. If I'm talking to, I work with a lot of financial planners in the financial industry, I would talk to them maybe more. My origin story would be probably what I share with you about losing everything would be my origin story. So the very long answer to your short question, Amos, is origin stories can totally change based on your audience. But that's why it's key before you make the presentation is figure out who is my audience and what is the problem that I solve. And you said it even better is how am I connecting the dots with this story? How does this story serve the point that I want to make with my audience?
So you get up in front of the audience, you have done all of your homework and you're ready to go. And all of a sudden you're 5 minutes in and you realize that you're not connecting. What do you do?
Well, hopefully you've practiced it enough that you are connecting. But I mean, actually, I'll give you another example about that. When I was in India, I was originally just touring schools, and this one principal opens up the door, and there's 5,000 kids in an auditorium. There's 5 TV stations, like 20 newspapers, and he says, and now for the next hour, Dr. Brassell is going to teach us the 3 secrets to reading better. Amos, nobody told me I'm speaking, and I have no such speech. I got 5,000 kids. I got media there. So I look, fortunately it was India, so I got to speak a little bit more slowly. So I look at the kids. I'm like, today I am going to teach you the 3 secrets to reading better. Who wants to learn the 3 secrets to reading? And the kids are going wild. And in my head, I'm like, what the heck are the 3 secrets to reading better? And basically, in my head, I did the process that I take my clients through on how I'm going to, okay, how do I connect? What's the content I want to teach? What's my call to action? How am I going to close this? How am I going to make it interactive because they're kids? And in 30 seconds, I created a presentation which went on live television to 1.5 billion people that evening. And now one of my companies is based on that speech that I came up with in my head. And so a lot of this is based on just having a lot of experience, is just have lots of, I call it weapons of mass instruction at your disposal, because you have no idea what's going to happen. And I actually kind of enjoy those moments now. So one time I was giving a presentation to 700 teachers in Wichita, Kansas, and a tornado hit and we lost power. And so I asked the janitor for a flashlight. Not the word flashlight. I asked the janitor for a flashlight, and I did the next 90 minutes in the dark. And that was a great confidence boost for me because I taught myself, ooh, I can do it in the dark.
Yep.
I was giving a presentation in Las Vegas, and it was a PowerPoint presentation, and the PowerPoint froze. And so while I was rebooting the PowerPoint for 15 minutes, I said, just so you know, whenever I have technical issues, I teach you songs. And it was crazy, Amos, because people, my evaluations afterwards are like, oh my gosh, the way he handled that PowerPoint thing, those songs, it was incredible. And I'm like, gosh, maybe I should just fake technology problems because I got better evaluations for that than ever. And so sometimes you just have to have like lots of different things at your disposal. And this is why I have lots of stories as well. And, I'm like, okay, what's a story I know is going to get everybody to laugh? I try to my presentations are based a lot on, my experiences as a kindergarten teacher. Like in my presentation, we're going to laugh a lot. I'm going to have you interact with the other people beside you. We're going to draw. We're going to sing. We're probably going to dance. And I'm trying to do that all the time because when you have those things at your disposal, especially any kind of movements, most speakers don't ever get their audience moving, and that's a great way to connect with an audience. I mean, I have one when I speak to teachers, and I say, I was in Japan recently speaking, and in Japan, they don't shake hands, they bow. And bowing can mean different things in different situations. It can be, what's up? It can mean I'm sorry. It can mean I have great respect for you. So everybody right now, I want you to get with a partner, face your partner. We're going to learn how to bow Japanese style. I'm like, okay, so a couple of things you need to know. Gentlemen, the way we bow is with our arms at our sides. Ladies, the way you bow is with your hands over your laps. Now, it's very important to keep your back perfectly straight. And have any of you ever seen the movie The Karate Kid? People say yes. I'm like, okay. Remember, look eye. Always look eye. Also, Whoever's younger, you have to hold your bow a little bit longer out of respect to your elder. I'll let you determine who's older. Okay. So I'm like, okay, so first of all, when you want to say hello to a person, you do a 15 degree bow. It looks something like this. So I demonstrate it. I'm like, okay, everybody do the hello bow. And so everybody does the hello bow to one another. I'm like, okay, now, and so here's where I insert a joke. I'm like, okay, now some of you are going to learn this the hard way. It's a good idea for the two of you to separate yourselves, because as these bows progress, there could be some foreheads a bumping. Like, well, okay, when you want to show respect to a person, you do a 30 degree bow. It looks something like this. I illustrate a 30 degree bow. I'm like, okay, now do the respect bow. And everybody does it, and I shout at them, look I, always look I. I'm like, okay. Now, when you want to show ultimate respect to a person, you do a 45 degree bow, and you hold it for an entire second. It looks something like this. All right, everybody do the ultimate respect bow, and everybody does that. I'm like, okay, now when you find out the person standing across from you is a public school teacher, you get on your knees and you bow to them at a 90 degree, and it's going to get everybody laughing, and it's going to get them, but it's also getting them working together. So I have that one. If I need something to connect. So again, I guess the answer to your question, Amos, I'm very long-winded on these things, is have lots of different strategies at your disposal. What are my stories? What are my interactives? What can I do to get to? You said something actually earlier that I loved about when you were talking about you bought the Steve Jobs sweater. You know, this is actually that's actually a very important point. Is what are you doing to stand out? Because I knew exactly what you're talking about. You don't even have to say it, and I've already visualized how Steve Jobs always dressed. I read Michael Caine's autobiography on acting, and he said something which was fascinating. When he was early on in his career as an actor, he wasn't getting roles. And so what he did is he bought these thick-rimmed glasses so casting agents would remember him. And he didn't need the glasses. But casting agents are like, oh, what about that guy with the thick-rimmed glasses? Is what are you doing to be memorable? And so you can do that in lots of different ways. You can do it visually, how you dress or whatever. I mean, I watched Meg Cabot. She wrote The Princess Diaries. And whenever she speaks, she always shows up in tiara. And that's always her opening line. It's like, oh, I'm always the only person with a tiara. Well, I think the last time I saw her speak was maybe 20 years ago. I remember that line because I was like, oh, that was something memorable. It's so difficult to stand out. We were talking about this earlier when we were off podcast. You were saying, hey, there's 4 million podcasts. I'm like, yeah, but there's none like yours. Like, what are you doing to stand out? And that's always what we're trying to do is what can you do to stand out? And so people know when they work with me, like, I only want you having fun on stage. I want you to be funny. I want you to, when you make mistakes, fess up to the mistakes. Yesterday I was working with a guy. He's terrified. He has a presentation to a major technology company today, and he's nervous as can be. I'm like, just say you're nervous, because this is what, and everybody in the audience has to hear this. People don't understand that audiences are actually cool. The moment you confess to being nervous, they're actually going to root for you. They're going to be like, oh, come on, no, you can do it. They don't want you to fail up there. What most of us hate is the person that sits there and acts like they have all the answers. Well, those are the people we despise. That's why I always laugh. I'm like, you ever notice that no presidential candidate ever grew up middle class? They all grew up in a log cabin. You know, like it's the story is how can I connect with people? And so it's a very long answer to your story, your very short question, which was, what do you do when you're not connecting? But I think you need to have, those reps are important, but just have lots of different things at your disposal.
I like it. So as we're coming to a close, we always ask our guests 3 questions. And the first one really comes out of many, many, many conversations over years. It hit me not that long ago that I should be asking all the leadership experts around the world this one question. And that is, if you could get school administrators from across the United States or even across the world sitting in front of you, if you could only give them one small piece of advice of something they should be adding into their curriculum, into their school, that would help produce better, well-rounded students for leadership in the future, what is that one thing you would tell those administrators?
Kindness. I think we need a lot more kindness. When I was a teacher, whether I was teaching my little ones or my older ones, if they left my classroom for the day, they always had to listen to the same refrain. I always said, remember kids, education is valuable, but execution is priceless. Knowledge is not power. Only applied knowledge is power. Knowing what the right thing to do and doing the right thing are two very different things. So let's go out, do the right thing. Let's make this world a better place. So kindness would be my answer to that.
Love it. Second question is, what is your go-to book that over the years you have continually come back to get insight out of?
Well, everybody's going to say the Bible. The Bible's a pretty good source. I'll give you my second one. I've been blessed with lots of wonderful mentors. One of them was Jack Canfield, and his book, The Success Principles. I think when I read that book, I was just blown away. I'm like, oh my gosh, he's put a $25,000 coaching program into a $20 book. The stories are incredible. The points he makes are right on. I would pay $25 just for the bibliography at the end of recommended reading. So I love Jack's Success Principles. Unfortunately, he just recently retired. He's one of the best speakers I've ever seen.
Awesome. And the last question is, in today's ever-changing world of technology, what is your favorite, most useful piece of technology today?
Books. Actual books. People should read books.
So now I like that. And interestingly, just a recent podcast I did, in the interview, I asked that question, and the person said, basically they said, you've kind of dated yourself by asking that question. And I said, well, what do you mean? And they said, well, if you were under 30, you would have asked, what's your favorite reel, Instagram account, or, whatever. And it kind of really hit me, to your point, that people are not cracking books open and reading them anymore. They're going to, social media and other places. So I love it. Books. I often say that my favorite technology is still pen and paper, rather than the other pieces. Well, before I forget, you have several books out. You also have your Well-Crafted Story workshop. Where can people find out more about you and how they can get engaged with you if they're interested?
Well, as a thank you to you, Amos, for having to bear with my stories and your audience, I wanted to give everybody a freebie. So if you go to freestoryguide.com, again, free story guide, like a tour guide, freestoryguide.com, I'm going to give everybody their own free storytelling blueprint. What this is an actual guide that takes you step by step through the exact coaching process that Coach Jimmy and I take our clients through. What this does for you is it takes the guesswork on how to create a more effective presentation. And what this means for you is the peace of mind to know that you're connecting with the people that you need to connect with and getting them to take that action that you want them to take. You can get that at freestoryguide.com. And again, Amos, I am so grateful for you to having me on this podcast and for all that you do. I always get some gems, especially from those last three questions from your guest. I'm really going to encourage you to continue this because you never know. It's one of the things I tell people. I say, it doesn't matter how many people are listening. All that matters is who is listening. And so never forget that.
Awesome. And I appreciate that. And I think all kidding aside, when we're done here, I'm going to go get my free story guide as well, because anything you can do to increase and make that process better and be able to connect with people, I think is helpful. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're just very grateful that we had you on. And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out our past episodes. And as well, if you're enjoying it, make sure you follow us so that you can see when the new episodes are coming out. Until next time, we appreciate you.